Imagine walking down a quiet road at night, the stars above you, when suddenly, without warning, your life is cut short. This was the tragic reality of Iris Billy, who at the time was a 30-year-old Indigenous woman, when her life ended in a senseless hit-and-run incident. But this wasn't just any hit-and-run. The driver was an on-duty police officer. This is the story of Iris Billy, a case shrouded in negligence and a desperate search for accountability. On November 23, 2023, Iris Billy was walking near a busy roadway in Arizona. It was a typical night for Iris, who was known to be independent and resilient, qualities that helped her navigate the challenges life threw at her. But on this particular night, her walk was interrupted in the most tragic way possible. A vehicle struck her, leaving her fatally injured. Instead of stopping, the driver fled the scene, leaving Iris to die alone on the roadside. A decision that would set off a wave of outrage and heartbreak across the community. Witnesses described the scene as chaotic, with emergency services arriving too late to save Iris. Hours later, the suspect returned to the scene, examining the very crime he had committed. They spoke with paramedics, interviewed witnesses, briefed and directed officers, filled out an autopsy report, and personally informed Iris's family of her death, all while deliberately concealing that he was the perpetrator. What makes this case even more disturbing is the extent of the cover-up. After striking Iris, the suspect attempted to hide evidence that linked him to the incident. When the investigation began, they inserted themselves into the process, ensuring that their involvement remained hidden. It was a betrayal of the very oath Josh Anderson took as an officer, to protect and serve. To stand before Iris's grieving family, delivering the news of her death without revealing his role, shows a level of deceit that shocked not just her loved ones, but the broader community. Iris's death sent shockwaves through the Indigenous community in Arizona, where the painful history of neglect and injustice towards Native people is all too familiar. Friends and family described Iris as a vibrant woman with a deep connection to her heritage and a love for her community. Her sudden death felt like a cruel injustice, a senseless act that could have been prevented. The community was left stunned. How could someone sworn to protect and serve leave a person to die on the roadside? In the days following the incident, protests erupted and vigils were held in her honor. Activists and community leaders called for accountability, demanding answers from the police department and city officials. Iris's family was left not only with the unbearable pain of her loss, but also with the daunting task of seeking justice in a system that has often failed Indigenous people. The investigation into Iris's death was marred by delays and inconsistencies. Initially, there was little information released to the public about the perpetrator involved, and questions about the circumstances of the hit-and-run went unanswered. It wasn't until public pressure mounted that the department acknowledged the officer's involvement. On November 27th, the White Mountain Apache Police Department arrested Anderson on multiple tribal criminal charges in connection with the death of Iris Billy. The department then turned the case over to the FBI. The indictment alleges that at approximately 3:31 a.m. on November 23rd, 2023, Anderson was on duty and was dispatched to conduct a welfare check of a body that had been observed on State Route 73 on White Mountain Apache tribal lands. Anderson proceeded to the scene and discovered that the person was deceased. Anderson later acknowledged that only minutes before being dispatched to the scene, he had driven the same stretch of highway and felt a bump, but continued southbound on SAR 73 without stopping to investigate. After Anderson's shift, he removed and concealed the broken parts from the front bumper area of his patrol vehicle. Officers visited Anderson's home to check his patrol car, as they already suspected him of being the driver who hit and fled the scene. Once they arrived, a lieutenant found what he believed to be blood, black hair, and brain matter. They asked if he ran over anything, to which Anderson responded no, but said he had run over skunks and other things in the past. They knew this was not true. Ultimately, the bumper piece found where Billy died was discovered in the bed of Anderson's patrol car. Officer Anderson resigned following the arrest. Although an indictment is simply a method by which a person is charged with criminal activity and raises no inference of guilt, evidence must be presented to a jury that will establish guilt beyond a reason of a doubt. Although there was a belief of possible DNA remnants, a mentioned video footage, and deliberately concealed evidence, they concluded Officer Anderson could be charged with 2 counts, one for engaging in misleading conduct to hinder or delay, and the other for corruptly altering and concealing evidence. If found guilty, the conviction for each of the 2 alleged crimes carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. As of September 2024, federal authorities announced 49-year-old Joshua Ben Anderson was sentenced to 13 months and was found guilty of corrupt altering and concealment. The conviction and sentence in this case cannot cure the tragedy of a vehicle fatality in rural Arizona. Nor does any evidence suggest the defendant was criminally responsible for that fatality. This sentence holds the defendant accountable for corruptly altering and concealing evidence as a now former law enforcement officer. Importantly, the sentence is within the advisory sentencing range for this crime, as determined by the United States Sentencing Commission, and we therefore consider it to be a reasonable sentence. Zach J. Stobe, United States Attorney's Office. Iris's case is not just about one woman's death. It represents a deeper, more troubling pattern. Native Americans, especially women, are disproportionately affected by violence and often see their cases mishandled or ignored. Iris's death became a rallying cry for change, with calls for improved accountability and transparency in law enforcement, particularly in cases involving Indigenous victims. The case has drawn national attention, shining a light on the critical need for justice system reforms, particularly in cases involving law enforcement officers. Her family, her friends, and her community remain steadfast in their quest for justice, unwilling to let Iris's memory be just another statistic